It began long before America's soldiers set foot on the beaches of Normandy, in the shadowed corridors of Washington, where secrecy was as much a weapon as the rifle. In late 1941, even before the United States officially entered World War II, a small circle of intelligence officers under the newly formed Coordinator of Information, later the Office of Strategic Services, began planning missions that would never appear in history books. Their orders were simple but chilling. Test the boundaries of covert warfare against the Axis, even if it meant no one would ever know they existed. One of the earliest of these operations would come to be known, in what few surviving fragments remain, as Operation Iceberg Phantom. Officially, it never existed. Unofficially, it was a daring mission into occupied Norway, a frozen landscape that had become critical to Nazi Germany's atomic ambitions. The heavy water plant at Vemork, near the small industrial town of Rjukan, was believed to be a key component in Hitler's push for nuclear capability. The British had already suffered setbacks there, and now, the Americans wanted their own intelligence, to understand just how far the Germans had gone. The mission's team consisted of 8 men, led by Captain James "Jack" Avery, a mountain-trained commando from the 10th Light Division. Accompanying him were Norwegian resistance fighters familiar with the terrain, men who had already risked their lives in sabotage attempts. Their task: infiltrate the plant's perimeter, gather photographic and material evidence, and extract via the Hardangervidda Plateau using experimental long-range radio beacons to guide a retrieval aircraft. The technology, developed by Bell Labs, was far ahead of its time, compact, coded, and classified as beyond field use. This would be its first and last test. By January 1942, Operation Iceberg Phantom was underway. Under cover of darkness, a modified B-24 Liberator dropped the team high in the Telemark Mountains. The weather was brutal, minus 30 degrees Celsius, whiteout conditions, and winds that tore at their parachutes. 2 men were killed on landing. The survivors pressed on, hauling their gear through miles of deep snow. The resistance contact in Rjukan had gone silent days earlier, forcing the team to move without local guidance. Still, Avery's last transmission on February 2nd was calm. Approaching target. Heavy snow. We'll reconvene after entry. That was the last time anyone heard from them. For weeks afterward, OSS listening posts in Scotland attempted to reach their frequency. Nothing. British intelligence reported increased Gestapo activity around Rjukan, but no confirmation of captured Americans. When Allied forces later raided the area in 1943, they found no trace of the men, their radios, or the classified signal beacons. The only clue surfaced from a German field report, an intercepted message referencing an unidentified Allied group neutralized near the High Valley. No names, no unit, no details. The report was buried in the archives. Years later, fragments of correspondence between OSS Director William Donovan and the War Department referenced an incident in Norway and loss of prototype signal apparatus. Both lines were redacted in post-war documentation. What little is known comes from declassified logistics manifests showing 8 parachutes missing from an OSS depot in Scotland, matching Avery's team number. A local Norwegian farmer, interviewed in 1957, recalled stumbling upon a burned parachute near Lake Musvatn and metal pieces unlike any seen before. He reported it to Allied authorities, but nothing came of it. The coordinates he gave were quietly erased from follow-up reports. When modern researchers revisited the area decades later, all they found were twisted fragments of aluminum, impossible to identify, impossible to trace. Some historians suggest that Iceberg Phantom was less about sabotage and more about early nuclear reconnaissance, a desperate attempt to understand Germany's scientific progress before the Manhattan Project was even fully underway. Others believe it was a test of new espionage technologies, cold weather gear, coded transmissions, or aerial extraction systems never meant for public eyes. Whatever its purpose, the operation's silence speaks louder than any report. Captain Avery's name does not appear in any official roster. The 10th Light Division records list him as transferred with no further entries. His family received no telegram, no medal, and no explanation. The Norwegian resistance archives contain a note, written in trembling pencil: "The Americans came, but the mountain took them." Today, the region of Telemark is a quiet place, the heavy water plant now a museum. The The valleys serene and indifferent to the ghosts of war, but the frozen ridges still whisper of that lost team, the secret radio that never called home, and the classified mission whose existence was meant to vanish with the snow. And as historians piece together the few remaining clues, one question endures like an echo through the cold Norwegian wind. Were they silenced by the enemy, or by the secrets they carried? The truth remains sealed under layers of frost and forgotten paper, a beginning to a pattern that would repeat throughout the war as America's most classified missions vanished into history. In the vast and merciless Atlantic of 1943, the line between hunter and hunted blurred with every breaking wave. By then, the Battle of the Atlantic had reached a fever pitch, convoys of Allied ships ploughing through icy waters while German U-boats stalked beneath the surface like unseen predators. But amid the coded radio chatter, one mysterious transmission would trigger one of the most secretive US Navy missions of the war, an operation known only to a handful of intelligence officers as Operation Silent Harvest. It began with a series of strange radio bursts detected by a US Navy listening post on the Azores. The signals resembled standard Kriegsmarine U-boat communication frequencies, but their timing, encoding, and amplitude pattern were off. Analysts suspected the Germans had developed a new encrypted system capable of coordinating submarine wolfpacks beyond Allied detection. The Office of Naval Intelligence, ONI, wanted proof, and they wanted it quietly. Thus, in February 1943, under orders classified above top secret, Commander Harold Hal Reeves was selected to lead a small reconnaissance team aboard a modified Catalina PBY flying boat. Reeves was a veteran signals officer from the USS Ancon, known for his calm under pressure and his deep understanding of enemy encryption. His mission: trace the origin of the mysterious transmissions to a suspected German communication relay, a ghost convoy that intelligence reports placed somewhere in the mid-Atlantic gap, the so-called Black Pit, where Allied air cover could not reach. The Catalina, designated PBY-5A, was fitted with advanced radio direction finding gear and experimental magnetic anomaly detectors, prototypes of what would later evolve into Cold War submarine tracking systems. With Reeves were 6 men, 2 radio technicians, a cryptographer, a navigator, a co-pilot, and a gunner. They took off from Layes Field on the Azores on the night of March 3, 1943, under a moonless sky and radio silence. At 02:17 hours, their first transmission was routine, proceeding to Sector Delta 9. No contact yet. By dawn, they reported detecting faint, irregular Morse pulses, matching the suspected German signal pattern. Then, without warning, the messages stopped mid-transmission. Silence. For 3 days, ONI stations across the Atlantic tried to raise the Catalina. Nothing. No distress call. No radar echo. No oil slick or debris ever surfaced. The aircraft and its crew had vanished. British Coastal Command later reviewed the records. Curiously, 2 separate U-boat logs from that same night mentioned unidentified aircraft activity near Convoy Lanes 600 miles west of Ireland, followed by a sudden electrical disturbance that interfered with radio communication. One U-boat commander described seeing a flash on the horizon unlike lightning, brief and without sound. The coordinates roughly matched the Catalina's last known position. Weeks later, fragments of the intercepted German ghost transmissions were decoded. The Enigma analysts at Bletchley Park concluded that the signals did not correspond to any known Kriegsmarine unit. The call signs were irregular, inconsistent with any U-boat group pattern. Someone, or something, was imitating German channels. Whether it was a decoy operation or a rogue experiment remains unknown. What is certain is that after March 1943, the strange transmissions abruptly ceased, as if their source had been silenced. The official report filed by ONI was only 2 pages long. Most of it was redacted. A single surviving memo from Rear Admiral John Redman reads, "Recommend no further flights in the Atlantic Dead Zone until clarification received regarding Incident Delta 9. No clarification ever came. In the post-war years, when declassification requests were filed, the Navy claimed the operation never took place. The families of the crew received telegrams stating only that their loved ones were lost on active duty. There were no funerals, no wreckage, no graves. Commander Reeves's service record was sealed. His name later appeared on a classified memorial plaque at the Naval Cryptologic Command, a monument to those who vanished in silence. Modern naval historians have tried to reconstruct Operation Silent Harvest through scattered data and cryptic correspondence. One declassified fragment from 1947 mentions recovered radio fragments of unknown origin near the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, possibly from the Catalina, possibly from something else. The debris was reportedly transferred to a facility in New London, Connecticut, then erased from the inventory. Some believe the mission was a field test for early sonar detection arrays or radar countermeasure systems. Others argue it was an interception gone wrong, that Reeves' team stumbled upon an experimental German transmission vessel and was destroyed before they could report back. The truth, as with so many wartime mysteries, lies buried beneath the Atlantic. Today, sonar maps show vast trenches where ships and submarines lie entombed in darkness, but among them, no trace of a Catalina designated for Silent Harvest has ever been found. Every few years, oceanographers discover twisted fragments of metal at impossible depths, relics of the war's ghosts, and for a fleeting moment, hope stirs that Reeves's craft might be one of them. Yet even if found, the answers might remain locked behind sealed wartime codes and forgotten intelligence vaults. The ocean, like history, keeps its secrets well. And as the war raged on in 1944, the United States continued its pattern of silence and secrecy, sending men into the unknown on missions so classified that even their own commanders could not speak their names. The next would come not from the sea, but from the skies over a fractured Europe. By the spring of 1944, the war in Europe had entered a decisive phase. Allied bombers rained destruction on German industry, and the Soviet advance in the east forced Hitler's armies into retreat. Yet behind the front lines, the shadow war of intelligence and counterintelligence raged as fiercely as any battlefield. Deep within the OSS headquarters in London, one mission, Operation Copper Falcon, was prepared in utter secrecy. It was a desperate gamble to extract key German scientists before they could fall into Soviet hands, a race against time and ideology. The origins of Copper Falcon trace back to February 1944, when Allied intelligence intercepted communications from the Reich Research Council. The message mentioned an evacuation of technical personnel from laboratories in occupied Czechoslovakia to a new facility under mountain protection. The Allies feared these scientists were working on advanced propulsion systems and chemical weapons that could alter the war's course. The OSS, working with the British Special Operations Executive, SOE, decided to intervene, not through open assault, but through a covert extraction behind enemy lines. At the center of this operation was Major Samuel Sam Greer, an American intelligence officer fluent in German and Czech. A veteran of North Africa and Italy, Greer had a reputation for improvisation, the kind of man who could vanish in plain sight. His mission: infiltrate occupied Czechoslovakia, locate two target scientists, Dr. Hans Keller and Dr. Friedrich Brandt, and escort them to a prearranged extraction point near the Sudeten Mountains. The cover story described Greer's team as Luftwaffe couriers. Their documents and uniforms were forged to perfection by the SOE's forgery unit at Baker Street. On August 17, 1944, a modified B-24 Liberator took off from RAF Harrington under the veil of darkness. On board were Greer and 5 operatives, 2 Czech partisans, a communications officer, a demolition expert, and an OSS medical officer. Their drop zone lay deep within German territory, near the industrial town of Pilsen. Local resistance contacts were waiting, or so the intelligence briefings claimed. The drop went flawlessly. The men landed in a clearing north of Pilsen, buried their chutes, and made radio contact with London. Falcon landed, proceeding to target, but after that message, silence. For weeks, the OSS tried to re-establish communication. Nothing came through. Then, on September 5th, a coded signal appeared. Faint, distorted, but authenticated. Objective secured. Exfiltration underway. East wind rising. It was the final message. Post-war intelligence uncovered traces of their journey through resistance channels. Witnesses in the small village of Železná Ruda reported seeing men in German uniforms accompanied by 2 civilians moving toward the border. Hours later, locals heard aircraft engines echoing through the night, followed by a distant explosion. German military reports from the area described an unidentified aircraft crash near the Sudeten range. The wreck was burned beyond recognition. No bodies were recovered, no tail numbers legible. The region was quickly cordoned off by SS units. When American forces reached Czechoslovakia months later, they scoured the area. The crash site had been stripped bare. Only fragments of aluminum and the remnants of a radio set remained. A field notebook found nearby contained a single legible entry: "Extraction compromised. We move at dawn." The rest was smeared with ash and rain. After the war, rumors circulated among intelligence veterans that the aircraft assigned to Operation Copper Falcon carried not only the scientists but also experimental documents, early jet propulsion blueprints that could have rivaled German Me-262 technology. Some even speculated that the OSS team was intercepted by Soviet agents eager to claim the scientists themselves. Neither theory was proven, but both explained why Allied records regarding the mission remained sealed for decades. In the 1960s, a Czech forestry team stumbled upon twisted wreckage buried deep in a ravine near Železná Ruda. Among the debris was a fragment of an American-issue oxygen tank and a partially melted identification tag reading GR. It was never confirmed to belong to Major Greer, but the discovery reignited speculation. For a brief period, US military attachés requested access to the site, then abruptly withdrew their request. The area was later designated a restricted environmental zone. A declassified OSS memorandum from late 1944 refers obliquely to the loss of copper, assets, and German technical materials in sector Delta 15. The final line of the memo, still partly redacted, reads, "No further attempts at recovery authorized. Deny knowledge of operation." Major Greer's family was told he died during special operations in Europe. His name appears on no official casualty list, nor in any OSS archive released to the public. For decades, the operation was dismissed as rumor, until Czech archives opened after the Cold War. There, in a faded folder labeled Falcon, Unidentified Flight, researchers found a German intelligence report describing a foreign extraction attempt involving 2 defecting engineers. It ended abruptly. Both assets presumed lost in air crash, recovery of documents incomplete. No definitive conclusion was ever reached. The 2 scientists, Keller and Brandt, were never found in any Allied or Soviet records. Some believe they perished in the crash. Others suggest they were taken by the Soviets and given new identities under Operation Osoaviakim, the Soviet counterpart to America's post-war scientist recruitment. To this day, the crash site in the Sudeten Mountains remains a quiet, forested scar, its secrets buried under decades of moss and snow. No monument marks where those 6 men fell. Only the wind moves through the trees, as if carrying the echo of that last radio call. East wind rising. It was a warning, or perhaps a confession, that even in victory, not all missions end with answers. And in the closing months of the war, as Germany's empire crumbled, America's clandestine operations would only grow darker, chasing knowledge too dangerous to leave behind. By the winter of 1944, Germany was collapsing under the weight of Allied pressure. From the west, American and British forces pushed through the Ardennes. From the east, the Red Army surged relentlessly toward Berlin. Yet amid this chaos, intelligence, reports hinted at something extraordinary, an underground complex hidden beneath the forests of Thuringia, central Germany. Its purpose was unknown, but aerial photographs showed extensive rail lines vanishing into the mountainside. Rumors whispered of secret weapons, experimental aircraft, even new types of bombs. To the Allies, the discovery represented not only a threat, but an opportunity. What lay beneath that mountain might redefine the balance of power in the post-war world. And so began Operation Paper Veil. The OSS, by then operating under deep coordination with British MI6, drafted the mission in December 1944. Its objective was clear: infiltrate Thuringia, locate the rumored facility, and secure any documents, equipment, or personnel related to advanced German weapons programs. The name Paper Veil reflected both the mission's secrecy and its ultimate goal: to capture the paper trail of Nazi science before it could be destroyed or seized by the Soviets. The task fell to Captain Robert Hanley, a reconnaissance officer with the OSS's Counter-Scientific Intelligence Division. a real but little-known branch responsible for tracing technological developments within the Reich. Hanley was a quiet man, a former engineer from Chicago who had joined the agency after Pearl Harbor. He spoke fluent German and had spent months analyzing intercepted communications that referenced Project Morgenrot, Project Dawn. This project, Allied analysts believed, could involve research into atomic fission or high-velocity aircraft engines. On March 1, 1945, Hanley led a six-man team from an Allied forward base in France. They carried false papers identifying them as German technical inspectors from the Ministry of Armaments, a ruse prepared by British intelligence. Their route took them through war-torn Bavaria into territory still patrolled by remnants of the Wehrmacht and SS. By March 4th, they had crossed into Thuringia. Their radio check-ins to London grew sporadic. Then, at 23:40 hours on March 6th, Hanley's last confirmed transmission crackled across the airwaves. Entering primary site, heavy patrols, proceeding underground. After that, nothing. 2 weeks later, American armored divisions advanced through Thuringia and discovered evidence of massive subterranean tunnels near Ohrdruf, the first Nazi concentration camp liberated by U.S. troops. Beneath the camp lay tunnels filled with machinery, aircraft parts, and half-finished V-2 components. But Hanley's unit was nowhere to be found. No bodies, no vehicles, no equipment. It was as if they had stepped into the earth and never returned. What happened next only deepened the mystery. In April 1945, a US Signal Corps detachment stationed near Weimar intercepted German communications discussing enemy infiltrators neutralized near the Dornberg mines. Coordinates placed the site roughly 10 miles from Ohrdruf, exactly where Hanley's team had been heading. When American forces reached that area days later, they found the tunnels deliberately collapsed. Explosives had been used to seal the entrances. Locals reported hearing detonations followed by days of strange rumbling underground. No recovery effort was attempted. The war was ending, and the Allied priority had shifted to occupation and reconstruction. In the years that followed, Operation Paper Veil vanished from official discourse. Publicly, the US and Britain focused on Operation Paperclip, the post-war recruitment of German scientists for American projects. But quietly, files referencing Paper Veil were classified at the highest level. One internal memorandum from 1946 noted, Team Hanley presumed MIA during unauthorized incursion. Mission results inconclusive. All materials reclassified under Atomic Intelligence Directive. Then, in 1952, a report surfaced from a former German engineer who had worked in the region during the war. He described a vast underground complex near the town of Jonastal, guarded by SS units and engineers from the Morgenrot project. He claimed that in the final days of March 1945, several foreign-speaking men in German uniforms were captured near the facility and executed. Their identities were never confirmed. The engineer's testimony, dismissed at the time as unreliable, later matched OSS geographic analysis of the Paper Veil operation zone. Hanley's widow received no official explanation. Only decades later did his name quietly appear on a memorial at Langley, honoring fallen intelligence officers from WWII whose missions remained in shadow. So, of the 6 men who entered Thuringia under the veil of deception, not one was ever accounted for. Modern research in the Jonastal region has uncovered miles of sealed tunnels, concrete-lined corridors, and massive ventilation shafts. Silent witnesses to something monumental. Geophysical scans have detected deeper levels still inaccessible beneath the earth, suggesting there may be chambers yet undiscovered. German wartime records from the Armaments Ministry reference a Thuringia installation with nuclear research components and advanced energy systems. The connection to Project Dawn remains speculative, but the timeline aligns precisely with Hanley's disappearance. The irony of Operation Paper Veil is that it foreshadowed the secret post-war struggle that would define the Cold War, the race for knowledge hidden behind collapsing empires. Both East and West sought to capture not just scientists, but secrets buried in the ground. And in that race, it seems, Hanley and his men may have gone too far, crossing a line even their superiors would later deny existed. Today, the forests of Thuringia are quiet, the tunnels sealed under decades of dust and politics. But every so often, explorers uncover fragments, rusted tools, broken switches, faded blueprints stamped Geheime Reichssache, state secret. Each piece draws the same haunting question. What did they find down there, and why was it buried so deeply? As the war drew to a close, the OSS turned its focus to one final urgent mission, not in Germany, but in the Pacific, where secrecy took on an entirely new dimension. It was a mission so classified that even now, its name remains half erased from history. The fifth and final operation, Lost to Time. April 1945. The European war was ending, but in the Pacific, a storm was gathering. As Allied forces closed in on Okinawa, whispers of Japan's hidden scientific efforts reached Washington. The Manhattan Project was nearing completion, and American intelligence was desperate to know whether Imperial Japan was pursuing a similar weapon, or worse, whether it had already begun secret negotiations with Germany for advanced technology. In those final, feverish months of the war, a mission was authorized under absolute secrecy, known only to a handful within the OSS and naval intelligence. Its codename, Operation Shadow Vortex. Officially, it never existed. Unofficially, it was one of the most perilous and secretive American operations of the entire Pacific campaign. The goal was unprecedented. A small team would infiltrate Japanese-occupied territory in northern China to locate a rumored imperial research facility outside Mukden, what modern Shenyang once was, and where chemical and biological experiments were allegedly being conducted under the direction of Unit 731 scientists. But intelligence also hinted that German engineers, recently arrived via submarine, might be working there on propulsion and explosive systems far beyond Japanese capability. The mission's purpose: confirm the exchange and, if possible, capture the data before it disappeared forever. The operation was led by Commander Thomas "Tom" Ridley, an OSS field operative with experience in East Asia since 1941. Ridley had served alongside Chinese guerrillas and had coordinated with the famed Flying Tigers under General Claire Chennault. His team of 7 included an interpreter, a demolitions expert, 2 Marines, and 2 members of the Sino-American Cooperative Organization, SACO, who specialized in operating behind enemy lines. Their insertion plan was devised jointly with the US Navy's Submarine Command at Pearl Harbor. In late May 1945, a Gato-class submarine, the USS Lionfish, left Guam under sealed orders. Its destination, the Liaodong Peninsula, along the coast of Manchuria. The plan was to land Ridley's team at night, near the mouth of the Taizhi River, from which they would travel inland under the guise of defected Japanese technicians. They carried false papers, miniature radios disguised as cigarette cases, and a collapsible signal mast designed for extraction by aircraft if the mission succeeded. The device, one of the first of its kind, was a forerunner of the Fulton Skyhook, years before it was officially invented. On June 3, 1945, the Lionfish reported a successful landing. The team transmitted one short message: onshore, proceeding to target. Then the sea swallowed their words. 2 weeks later, OSS intercept stations in Kunming detected a faint transmission matching Ridley's coded frequency. Target confirmed. Multiple labs. Foreign personnel confirmed. Attempting photo capture. Then silence again. After Japan's surrender in August, Allied units advancing through Manchuria discovered numerous abandoned laboratories, but the facility Ridley described was not among them. Soviet troops, who had entered the region in mid-August, claimed to have already cleared the area. When questioned, Soviet intelligence officers denied knowledge of any American presence. The OSS quietly listed the operation as incomplete. The Lionfish's logs were altered before debriefing, omitting the Manchurian landing entirely. Ridley's name was later removed from active rosters. By 1947, all files connected to Operation Shadow Vortex were reclassified under the newly formed CIA's Atomic Counterintelligence Division. In the few declassified fragments that remain, one line stands out. Field report terminated due to loss of all operatives. Subject matter integrated under separate authority. and yet tantalizing clues remain. In 1951, a joint US-Japanese war crimes tribunal in Tokyo heard the testimony of a former Japanese chemist who claimed that foreigners in enemy uniform were captured near Mukden in the summer of 1945. He described them as taller than Japanese, speaking a strange version of Chinese, and said they were interrogated by the Kempei Tai, Japan's military police, before being transferred to an unknown location. The testimony was dismissed as hearsay, and the chemist himself vanished before further questioning. Modern historians studying Operation Shadow Vortex believe the mission may have intersected with what later became known as Project Nigo, Japan's small-scale atomic research effort. Some suggest Ridley's team was investigating rumors of uranium shipments from Germany, the same ones carried by the submarine U-234, intercepted by US forces in May 1945, carrying enriched uranium oxide bound for Japan. The timeline fits. Ridley's mission began just weeks after the U-234's surrender. Whatever Ridley found, or failed to find, may have been erased as part of the post-war scientific sweep. In 1946, US records show several captured Japanese scientists were secretly relocated to American custody under Operation Paperclip's Pacific equivalent, Operation Blacklist. Among their possessions were fragments of research notes written in both Japanese and German, referencing Joint Propulsion Work, 1945, Mukden. None of those documents mention the OSS team. None list their fate. Today, Commander Ridley's name is carved into the memorial wall of the missing at Manila's American Cemetery. His family received only a telegram that read, "Missing in action, Pacific Theater, June 1945. No further word ever came. In the years following the war, as the Cold War tightened its grip, even the mention of Shadow Vortex disappeared from government archives. When portions of the OSS records were finally declassified in 2008, researchers noticed something unusual, an unexplained gap in the operational numbering sequence between Pacific Field Missions 439 and 441. Mission 440, it seems, never officially existed, but the truth, like so many buried beneath the fog of war, may still lie somewhere in the earth of Manchuria, in a forgotten bunker, in the ashes of destroyed documents, or perhaps in the memories of those who were told to forget. 5 missions, 5 shadows erased. And though the world celebrated victory in 1945, these quiet disappearances whispered a different story, one that ended not in triumph, but in silence. And yet, silence itself can be a clue, because every vanished report, every redacted page, hinted that the war's end was not the end at all, merely the beginning of a new kind of battle, fought not with armies, but with secrets. History often closes its books too soon. When the guns fell silent in 1945, the world believed it had reached the end of the most devastating conflict in human history. But within the archives and basements of intelligence agencies, the war did not end. It merely changed form. The stories of 5 classified missions, Iceberg Phantom, Silent Harvest, Copper Falcon, Paper Veil, and Shadow Vortex, were locked away under the highest levels of secrecy. What remained were fragments, redacted reports, incomplete radio logs, and nameless graves scattered across continents. Together, they painted a portrait not of triumph, but of deliberate erasure. In the years immediately following the war, America's new intelligence apparatus, the Central Intelligence Agency, absorbed the remnants of the OSS. Thousands of case files were reviewed, reorganized, or destroyed. Among them were the operational records of the 5 lost missions. Historians later noted that entire sequences of mission numbers vanished from declassified OSS archives, as if entire campaigns had been excised from history. When asked about these missing operations, the official answer was always the same: no record found, yet traces persist, in footnotes, in overlooked field memos, in faded letters written by families who never received answers. A 1947 internal memo from the CIA's Scientific Intelligence Division, uncovered decades later, referred cryptically to unaccounted pre-atomic field units lost during exploratory operations in Axis territories. Another, marked Eyes Only, warned, further inquiry into these matters is inadvisable. Sensitive intersections with post-war assets. That single phrase, sensitive intersections with post-war assets, would haunt historians for years, It suggests the unthinkable, that some of these missions may have uncovered technologies or personnel later folded into American post-war programs, that perhaps the lost men of these classified operations were not erased by accident, but because what they found had to remain hidden, even from their own government. Take the parallels between Operation Copper Falcon and the later Project Paperclip. The timing, the objectives, the targets, all align almost too neatly. Or consider Operation Paper Veil, which vanished just as Allied forces stumbled upon Thuringian tunnel systems that would later become the focus of Cold War nuclear research. Were these missions simply early forays into the same scientific shadows that defined the post-war era? Or did they uncover something that the victors deemed too valuable or too dangerous to disclose? Even the Pacific mission, Operation Shadow Vortex, echoes eerily in later intelligence movements. Declassified naval communications from 1946 mention transferred technical data from Manchurian source, authorization A440. The number matches the missing OSS mission index, Mission 440. If true, it would mean the operation's objectives were met, but the cost, 7 men, officially vanished, was buried under a false narrative of failure. In 1959, a retired Navy cryptographer named Harold Jenkins, who had served briefly at the Naval Communications Annex during the war, gave a rare interview to a historian. His words were cautious but revealing. "There were missions," he said, "that didn't make it into the books, not because they failed, but because they succeeded in ways no one wanted to talk about." Weeks later, Jenkins retracted his statement in writing, claiming misremembered details. The transcript of that interview was quietly classified under continuing national security concern. But despite decades of silence, the echoes of these operations refused to fade. In 1987, Norwegian hikers uncovered fragments of metallic debris high in the Rjukan Mountains, later confirmed to be from a 1940s-era American radio assembly. In 1994, a sonar scan in the North Atlantic located wreckage consistent with a PBY Catalina flying boat at a depth of nearly 3,000 meters. In 2003, Czech forest rangers unearthed a rusted compass engraved with US Army Air Corps 1943. None of these discoveries were officially linked to the classified missions, but all appeared exactly where the historical breadcrumbs suggested they would be. Every generation of researchers who chases these stories eventually hits the same wall. Not a lack of evidence, but a refusal of access. Requests under the Freedom of Information Act return the same result. Documents not found or remain classified in full. Even now, 80 years after the events, certain wartime files remain sealed until 2045, a full century after the end of the conflict. Why? What secret could still warrant such protection? Perhaps the answer lies not in what these missions found, but in what they represented. They were glimpses of a world where secrecy became currency, where the boundaries between wartime necessity and peacetime control blurred. These lost operations were the template for the Cold War's shadow conflicts, precursors to covert programs that would define the next half-century. From nuclear espionage to clandestine scientific transfers, their legacy lives on, not in victory parades, but in locked vaults and unnamed files. The men who undertook them are long gone, their families left only with folded flags and unanswered questions. But their stories, the ones whispered across decades, remind us that history is not merely written by the victors. It is curated by the survivors. And sometimes, the greatest secrets are not those the enemy hides from you, but those your own nation hides from itself. So when we speak of World War II, we remember the battles, the generals, the turning points. But somewhere between the headlines and the archives lies another war, fought in silence, buried beneath classification stamps, and sealed away under the phrase top secret. 5 missions, 5 stories erased. Yet the paper trail, faint but unbroken, remains. And perhaps one day, when the last lock is opened and the final file unsealed, the world will know what these men truly found in the shadows of history. Until then, their legacy endures. Not in what we know, but in what we are still forbidden to learn.